الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على عبد الله ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So we are continuing, and as I see quite a few new faces today, we will just take a moment or two just to remind everyone. I think maybe some came in the beginning and then didn't come and then came back again. So we'll just remind everyone what it is that we're doing here. We are in the process of explaining one of the most important books of Hadith, especially for the one who wishes to gain a firm understanding of the laws and regulations of Islam, and that is a book by Al-Imam Al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar Al-Asqalani rahimahullah ta'ala called Bulugh al-Maram. And Bulugh al-Maram is a book, as we said, of ahkam. So it's a book of ahadith that relate to the halal and the haram. You won't find ahadith about dreams and ahadith about seerah and ahadith about the virtue of making wudu or something like that. You're going to find in it things that relate to the halal and the haram, things you must do, things you mustn't do, things you should do. And it is broadly divided into two parts, ibadat and mu'amalat, so acts of worship, and then dealings like marriage and divorce and business transactions. And ibadat are divided according to the standard ordering of the scholars of fiqh. So for example, we begin with purification, and then prayer, and then zakah, and then fasting, and then and so on and so forth. And within purification, we break it down into water, into getting rid of impurities, into, for example, how to make wudu, things that break wudu, and so on and so forth. So right now, we've done a good few weeks worth of explaining, and we have reached towards the end of a chapter called Babu Izalat An-Najasah, or Babu Izalat An-Najasah, the chapter of removing impurities. So we started off with water. Everyone remembers we started off with the topic of different kinds of water, because when you're going to make wudu, the very first thing you're going to need to make wudu is you're going to need water. So you begin with water. Then we talked about Bab al-Aniyah, the chapter of the different kinds of vessels, because if you're going to carry that water around, you're going to carry it inside of a pot, or inside of a water skin, or inside of a bottle, and you need to know what kind of bottles and pots you're allowed to use and what kind of bottles and pots you're not allowed to use. And then we came on to Izalat An-Najasah, getting rid of impurities, because before you make wudu and before you prepare yourself for the prayer, your clothing, your body, your prayer place needs to be free of najasat, free of impurities and unclean things. And we're just at the end of this topic, and we're going to finish that up today. And then next week, inshallah, we're going to start from a new topic, which is Bab al-Wudu, the chapter of how to make wudu. So we're not quite at wudu yet. We should be there, inshallah, next week. But this week we need to finish off some topics on Bab Izalat An-Najasat. There is something I wanted to read to you, because there was a question came to me, and actually I didn't know the answer. And it was an interesting question. When we spoke about the dog, in the very beginning of this chapter, we spoke about cleaning the saliva of the dog. And someone asked a very good question. They said, we know that Allah Azza wa Jalla in Surah Al-Ma'idah allowed for us to use dogs for hunting. And Allah allowed us to eat what the dog grabs hold of and brings back. As Allah Azza wa Jalla mentioned to us in Surah Al-Ma'idah regarding the ones that you teach. مُكَلِّبِينَ تُعَلِّمُونَهُنَّ مِمَّا عَلَّمَكُمُ اللَّهُ. These hunting animals, and they can be either dogs or they can be like falcons and similar things, hunting animals, that you have trained them as Allah has taught you. You've trained these hunting animals. فَكُلُوا مِمَّا أَمْسَكْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ وَاذْكُرُوا اسْمَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. that eat whatever they grab and bring back for you, and mention the name of Allah upon it. Someone said, isn't this hadith, or isn't this ayah contradictory to the hadith of the najasah of the dog? And we said that the impurity of the dog is najasatun mughallaba. It's a very severe impurity. 7 times you have to wash it with dirt. So what is the situation of the hunting dog? Is it the case that we don't eat from that part that the dog chewed with its mouth, or how is the situation? I came across something from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, and I wanted to read it to you, because I think this answers the question really quite beautifully. He said, the saliva of a dog, if it reaches or if it touches the side, the animal that is hunted, it is not obligatory to wash it, in the most apparent of the 2 opinions of the scholars. So he said that there are 2 opinions on this, but the most obvious of the 2 opinions is that it is not required. And he said, وَهُوَ إِحْدَى الرِّوَايَتَيْنِ عَنْ أَحْمَدٍ. And it is one of the 2 opinions narrated from Imam Ahmad that it's not required to wash the animal that the dog grabs. He said, because the Messenger ﷺ did not command anyone to wash the hunting animal, that the prey that was brought back, the game, we call it, the game that was brought back. He said, so therefore this is what has been overlooked and forgiven because of mawdi' al-haja, the need of the people for this. And as for the Sharia commanded us to wash it when it is possible to wash it, and when there is a need for people to suffice with this, then they simply suffice with this. And he said this is an evidence for the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the legislator, takes into account maslahatul khalq, the need of people and what is in their interests. And this really, if we understand it, is a very, very, very powerful statement. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that those animals are impure. But Allah Azza wa Jalla has blessed us in the sense that He has not made this religion difficult for us. Were we commanded to wash and to cut away the skin from the animal that was grabbed, if you imagine if it was a rabbit, or you imagine that it's a smaller animal, this would be a lot of difficulty for a person to do. And it would be a matter of extreme hardship for the ummah. So Allah Azza wa Jalla let this issue go for the sake of maslahatul khalq, what is in the interests of mankind. And I'll just add to that a couple of points back from Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. He added to this, he said, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, إِذَا وَلَغَ, when the dog puts its tongue in to drink, and he did not say إِذَا عَضَّ, when the dog bites the hunting animal. So from this, we know that there are certain things come out from the dog when it licks with its tongue that don't come out when it bites with its teeth to drag the game to the person. And he said the apparent situation of the companions is that they did not used to wash the meat 7 times, the first time with dirt. And therefore this is from the things that are overlooked in the Sharia, and the harm of it is removed. And then the Shaykh put a beautiful point. He said, for example, the dead animal, okay, the animal that is dead, this is an animal that is impure, and it's filthy, and it's unclean. However, when you need to eat it, Allah Azza wa Jalla makes it possible for you to eat that animal without coming to harm. Like for example, you're in the desert and you don't have any food, and you come across a dead animal. Allah Azza wa Jalla makes it possible for you to eat that animal without the harm of that animal coming to you, even though that animal is impure. And then he said, likewise, the issue of, for example, the donkey, the domesticated donkey. So the domesticated donkey, the companions used to eat from it. And the Prophet ﷺ, according to the apparent wording of the ahadith, this was known, the Prophet did not forbid them, they used to eat from it. When they used to eat from it, it was okay. And now that it has been made haram, it is impure and it is khabith. It is filthy and it is impure. So we shouldn't think that these things are directly associated in the sense that, for example, the donkey was always impure from the first day to the last. Rather, Allah Azza wa Jalla decreed certain things to exist when people were eating those donkeys that made them acceptable to eat. But Allah Azza wa Jalla guided us to what was better after that by making them haram and forbidding them for us to eat. So like this Shaykh Uthaymeen is saying, it is apparent two things. First of all, when the dog bites and brings the animal, it is different from when the dog puts its tongue and licks around. That is one thing. Secondly, the Shaykh is saying that the Sharia has to overlook this because of the need. And thirdly, the Shaykh is saying that Allah Azza wa Jalla has put a certain circumstance in place that when that animal is brought, we are somehow protected from the harm of the dog with relation to that animal. Otherwise, Allah Azza wa Jalla would not allow us to eat from it. So Allah Azza wa Jalla has protected us from its harm in this circumstance, but has not protected us from its harm when it licks the vessel or eats the food under other circumstances. And this is the wisdom of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And the whole universe is in the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah Azza wa Jalla, either Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows something that is present in that animal, that when the dog gets hold of it, there is something to counter the saliva of the dog present on that skin or present inside of the animal, or Allah Azza wa Jalla decrees that the harm will never reach the Muslim when they say Bismillah over it because of the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jalla and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overlooking that circumstance. So there are two opinions of the scholars, as Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala said. One is that you have to clean it, one is that you don't have to. But the most apparent of the opinions is that you don't have to clean it because there is no evidence for it whatsoever. And in fact it contradicts the ayah when Allah Azza wa Jalla says, فَكُلُوا مِمَّا أَمْسَكْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ. Then eat whatever they grab hold of and drag back to you. Whatever they get hold of and drag back to you, eat from it. وَاذْكُرُوا اسْمَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. And remember the name of Allah Azza wa Jalla over it. And this is from the beauty of Islam and the ease of Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic hadith, ad-deen yusr, this religion is ease. Now ease doesn't mean that we make the haram halal. That's not ease. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made sticking to the wajib and the mustahab and being within the halal, Allah Azza wa Jalla has made it easy for us. Wallahi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have made it so hard for us. And I always tell this story to remind you guys that I once attended a workshop that was delivered by a Jewish man talking about kosher food. And wallahi, when he told us how much these people, Allah Azza wa Jalla's curse came upon them and they were made so many difficulties for, that wallahi, you think that there could not be a food that is kosher in this world. When you listen to the conditions they have, you see how Allah Azza wa Jalla made their situation so hard for themselves. They made it hard for them, and Allah Azza wa Jalla, in a punishment to them for the way that they behaved, Allah Azza wa Jalla made their religion so hard for them. And Allah Azza wa Jalla has made our religion so easy for us. Our issue of halal food is nothing like kosher, even though it's compared. It's so easy. And Allah Azza wa Jalla has overlooked so many things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has let go of so many things that He could have taken to His account. He could have said, you have to take that animal, you have to scrub its neck 7 times, the first time with dirt, you have to clean it and wash it, you have to cut it and then wash it again 7 times, and then you can only eat it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overlooked this to make this religion easy for us. So that should benefit us with 2 things. Number 1, we should not make the religion difficult for ourselves. That doesn't mean we make the haram halal. But we should not make the religion difficult for ourselves in those things that Allah has made permissible for us. The Prophet ﷺ, if he was given a choice between 2 things that were equal in nature, he would choose the easier of the 2. Salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. So the ease. And the second thing is that we should show our gratitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the ease that He has given us, and we should enter into Islam completely. Because Allah Azza wa Jalla, sometimes we see many Muslims, we live our lives as though Allah has made this religion like the religion of the Yahud. So difficult. I can't get a halal job, I can't get halal income, I can't get halal savings, I can't get halal bank, I can't spend, and they, subhanAllah, because, and it's like, I can't do it, it's too hard. But Allah has made this religion so easy for you that it shouldn't be difficult for you to practice. Yes, no doubt in our time it's harder than some things are harder than they were before. But the religion is not difficult if you stay within the limits set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you shouldn't go either side. You shouldn't make it difficult for yourself, nor should you avoid practicing the religion, saying that, oh, it's too much for me. And instead you should stay in the middle, where you're doing what Allah commanded you to do, and you're not going to either extreme. So there are some benefits in this. I thought this was a useful benefit, and it was a question I was asked I didn't know the answer to, so that is helpful. Okay, we continue bi'idhnillahi tabaraka wa ta'ala with Bulugh al-Maram. We have two hadith, hadith number 28 and hadith number 29 before we reach Bab al-Wudu. Before we reach Bab al-Wudu. Let me just find this English copy. وعن أسماء بنت أبي بكر رضي الله تعالى عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال في دم الحيض يصيب الثوب تحته ثم تقرصه بالماء ثم تنضحه ثم تصلي فيه متفق عليه. This hadith is the hadith of Asma bint Abi Bakr radiyallahu anhuma. And Asma bint Abi Bakr, she is Abdullah, like her sister Aisha radiyallahu anha is Abdullah. She is also Abdullah, Asma bint Abi Bakr, and she was married to Zubair ibn al-Awwam radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa ardah. From her children, two very famous children. One of them was a Sahabi and one of them was a Tabi'i. The Sahabi, the most famous of them was Abdullah ibn Zubair radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And Abdullah ibn Zubair, of course, for this name she is given the kunya Abdullah. And Urwa, who was a Tabi'i, Urwa radiyallahu ta'ala, or rahimahullah ta'ala. And Urwa, mashallah, was from the major scholars of fiqh among the Tabi'in. Because he took his fiqh from, you can see from the likes of Zubair ibn Awam, from his aunt Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha wa ardaha, and likewise from those, from the family of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, from the family of Zubair ibn Awam. So this is a very noble family in Islam and among the companions. Asma bint Abi Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anha wa an abiha. She narrated that the Messenger or the Prophet ﷺ said about dam al-hayd. Al-hayd is menstrual blood, or dam al-hayd is menstrual blood. And again, we have to define exactly what is intended by each term, so that we don't confuse. And in general, menstrual blood is well known, that it is a blood which forms inside of the lining of the womb. And it normally passes out of the lady on at regular intervals. So usually every month, or approximately every month, give or take, it passes out of the womb. And the purpose of this blood, as the scholars say, is the feeding of the baby. So the blood is there to feed and to take care of the baby in the womb. If there is no baby in the womb, or no baby is conceived, then the blood passes out. And this blood has certain unique characteristics in it, because it may be that other kinds of blood pass out of the private parts of a lady. For example, there is a difference between al-hayd and al-istihara. Istihara is what we call, for want of a better term, fresh bleeding or non-menstrual bleeding. And that is bleeding that comes out, but it is not menstrual blood. And the Prophet ﷺ said it is only a vein. It's only a vein, i.e. it is fresh blood from the body and not from the lining of the womb. Because the menstrual blood comes from the lining of the womb, it has certain characteristics. One is it has a very repugnant smell, and usually it has a very, very distinct color, very dark color, although not always, but usually it has a very dark color and a very repugnant smell, because it is not simply blood on its own, but it has components in from the lining of the womb, which are used to feed or to provide for and provide, and to sustain the life of the baby in the womb. So this blood, there is no doubt whatsoever among any of the scholars, and there is consensus on the topic, that dam al-hayd is impure, it's najis. And this blood is a blood which is from the most severe of the najasah. And you'll see from the description of the cleaning that it is more severe than even other kinds of blood. And we know that this is true, and this is something from the nature of mankind, that people know that this blood is an unclean form of blood, and that is why it is not permissible for a man to be intimate with his wife while she is menstruating, but it is permissible for him if she suffers from istihab, for example. So if she is suffering from fresh bleeding, where the blood is not coming from the lining of the womb, it is blood from a vein, then he is permitted to be intimate with her. But with menstrual blood, he is not, because we know that the impurity in it is more than the impurity in other blood even. At the same time, this blood presents another difficulty, and that is that it is frequent. It's not like an occasional thing. You cut your hand, maybe once a year, or you make your nose bleed maybe twice a year. But this is something that happens to a lady, on average 12 times in a year. So it's something very frequent, and it's also something that is continuous. It doesn't stop after 5 minutes like a nosebleed, where you can just put a tissue and stop it. So now cleaning up after dam al-hayd is very important, because it becomes something that it is frequent and it is over a prolonged period of time. Women range somewhere between 7 days to 10 days on average, that this blood will be coming out, and it will be coming out frequently, regularly over that period of 7 to 10 days. So it's a very long time, and therefore we need to be aware of how it should be cleaned. Because if it's coming out so often and for so long, you would expect that it will occasionally touch some of the material, some of the clothing. Bearing in mind, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were no such thing as ladies' sanitary towels and sanitary products, for example, that would reduce the chance of the blood coming out. Rather, they used to have, as we heard in the previous hadith regarding Bulugh, the well that they used to throw dirty things into, that ladies used to put a piece of cloth that they would throw away at the end of their menses, like a sanitary towel, but a piece of cloth. However, there's no doubt that this was not like the sanitary towels of today that are made to be absorbent and keep the blood away and so on and so forth. So there was a good chance that this would afflict or would touch the thawb of the lady. And Shaykh Wazan Habibullah Ta'ala, he mentioned in this, that look at the state of the companions, look at how simply they lived their lives. Asma radiallahu anha is speaking about the Prophet ﷺ, talking about dam al-hayd, menstrual blood, yusibu thawb, that drops onto clothing. A thawb is any stitched clothing, and sometimes we might have a mistaken idea that this is a thawb. But the meaning of thawb is any stitched clothing, any stitched material. So for example, what you call a kandura is a thawb, and an abaya you can call it a thawb, and likewise any sort of clothing men or women wear, it's called a thawb. So usually it's a piece of stitched clothing. So the lady's clothing would have some marks from menstrual blood on it. Bearing in mind that many of the Sahabiyat radiallahu did not have more than a piece of clothing. And we said this about the Prophet ﷺ with regard to semen on the clothing, that the situation of the Sahaba, particularly in the days of the early days of Medina before the conquests opened up the Islamic lands, the situation was they were extremely poor. And many of the women would only have one thawb. One single piece of clothing. She prays in it, she has her menses in it, she has relations with her husband in it, and this is all she has, one piece of clothing. Now she has to take care of this piece of clothing and keep it clean for her prayer. So the Prophet ﷺ explained, and this is also, we can take a benefit from it, in the sense that this hadith tells us the very important principle that there is no haya when it comes to seeking knowledge in Islam in terms of being scared to ask what is needed. Yes, there is haya in the way you ask knowledge, yes, there is haya in the life of a Muslim, but when it comes to asking an important question, or when it comes to finding out about an important ruling in Islam, there's no point everyone hiding under the table and saying we don't talk about things like this. It's very important. The Prophet ﷺ used to teach people how to deal with menstrual blood, how to deal with semen, how to deal with impure substances. He used to teach it, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so we must be careful, particularly with young daughters who are reaching the age of menses, they don't know what to do. This is important to teach them the fiqh of what to do, to teach them the rulings of it, and not to, sort of like sometimes culturally we might put our head in the sand and say we're not going to talk about this because this is something not very nice. This is the fiqh of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ taught us about this. He taught us how to clean ourselves after the toilet. He taught us the etiquettes of intimacy between husband and wife. And he did not find this to be an issue that the people should be shy from. And therefore, we do not find it an issue. We explain it as it is, and we clarify to people so that people know how to remain clean for their prayer. And perhaps, subhanAllah, I'll tell you a story that happened. Wallahi, this story really hit home with me when it came to this story. I remember one day in Ramadan, the last days of Ramadan, and maybe it was the day of Eid, or the last day of fasting, I don't remember, and I received a phone call. Assalamu alaikum. Salam, so it is a sister. She said, brother, I did not fast a single day in Ramadan. And she's whispering. I said, sister, why did you not fast a single day in Ramadan? She said, I had my menses for a whole month. Now, according to most opinions, this is not possible. What happened is she does not know the ruling of menses. And so she refrained from fasting for the whole month. She just wasted her Ramadan. Even though for most of that month she should have fasted. Why? And she's whispering, because I can't tell my husband, and I don't want my husband to hear that I'm asking a question about it. And this hit home, that people ruin their akhirah and their dunya if you don't ask about things that matter in Islam. And this is something that we really need to understand. And when we come to the hadith of al-mustahira, the woman who's suffering from regular bleeding, Aisha radiallahu anha said at the end of the hadith, ni'man nisa'u nisa'u ansar. How excellent are the women of the Ansar. They do not let haya stop them from getting fiqh in the religion. So this is important point. The Prophet ﷺ taught the people about this, and the Sahaba transmitted it to us. So we're talking about menstrual blood that touches the thawb. So what did the Prophet ﷺ say? The first thing he said, تَحُبْتُهُ. She should scrape it. And that is because menstrual blood is not like ordinary blood. It has a thickness to it and a substance to it. It is often clotted, it is often thick, and it often leaves a layer on top of the clothing. So if she were to wash it immediately, what might happen is it might spread. That layer of substance, of sort of cells or whatever it's made up of, might spread across the clothing. So the first thing the Prophet ﷺ said, she should, as he said, تَحُبْتُهُ, she should scrape it. So she can scrape it with, as in some narrations it's mentioned, bil-hajar, with a stone. So she could take a stone, a rough stone, and scrape it with the stone. She's scraping it dry. Or she could scrape it with her fingernails, or she could scrape it with a scouring pad, or something, similar along those lines. Something rough. In the traditional times, they used to do it with a stone. They used to take a rough stone and scrape it dry. And this is to remove the thickness of the najasah. And from this we have a benefit, wallah, which is a very important benefit, which is that all najasat that have a solid substance must be removed as much as possible prior to water being used. As an example, if, akramakumullah, we were to find stool on the ground, you are not allowed to pour a bucket of water over it and leave it. You must remove the pieces, you must remove the physical content of that stool and then put the water on the ground. And the same is anything which has like a body to it or a thickness to it, it should be removed in its dry form as much as possible, and then water can be used. So with regard to this, the first thing, tahattu, she should scrape it. ثم تقرصه بالماء. Then she should rub it with water. What is rubbing with water? She puts the water on and she takes the two pieces together of the clothing and she rubs it together like this with friction. So the purpose here is to rub the pieces of cloth together to cause the stain to go completely into the fibers. Because like the scholars say, the blood will be on top of the clothing and the blood will have, like they say, tasharrara. The clothing will have absorbed some of the blood. And to get rid of the absorbed blood, you rub the clothing together and the friction causes the fibers in the clothing to be removed, or to remove the stains from the fibers in the clothing. Then she should wash it. So once she washes it like she washes everything else, then she can pray in it. Muttafaqun alayh. This is agreed upon by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. So this explains to us a number of important rulings with regard to menstrual blood and other things. With regard to removing najasat in general, if it has a solid substance to it, the solid substance must be removed prior to the use of water. That is the first point. And menstrual blood may or may not, it depends how much of it fell. But if enough of it fell on the clothing, it may be that it has like a layer or a solid substance on it that should be removed with something like a pumice stone, like a rough stone, or with fingernails, or a scouring pad, or any similar thing that we have of our, sort of modern day equivalents, a brush or something like that, to remove the thickness from it. Then it's put into water and it's rubbed together. And at the end of the day, that's what a washing machine does, right? When you put it in the washing machine causes the clothing to rub against itself and come out clean, and then it is washed with water. As for someone may say, what about using a washing machine? What about just putting it in the washing machine? If the washing machine achieves the goal of removing the solid substance and then rubbing the clothing together and then washing it, then there's no harm in that, inshallah. But better than that is to rub it first dry and then put it in the washing machine and get rid of it. That is better and closer to the sunnah. But at the end of the day, in Islam An-Najasah, the key thing is getting rid of the najasah. Apart from the dot where you must use the dirt, which is a part of getting rid of it. Otherwise, the ruling is simply whatever gets rid of it is good enough. So if putting it in the washing machine gets rid of it, that is good enough. But closer to the sunnah is for it to be rubbed dry to remove anything that has come on the outer part of the clothing, and then the washing machine does the job of rubbing the fibers together and washing the clothing and getting rid of the stain completely. This hadith covers a number of issues in it. Some of them we've already mentioned, but including in this is obviously that the menstrual blood is impure. Included in this hadith is that there is a method of washing different kinds of najasat in such a way that they will be removed, and that if they have a solid substance, that solid substance needs to be scraped off first. From the benefits of this hadith are the importance of purity and the importance of being pure when you pray, and that being pure when you pray is a condition of the prayer. Because the Prophet ﷺ did not say, ثُمَّ تُصَلِّي فِي, and just pray or صَلِّي فِي, just pray in it. He said you must تَحُرْتُهُ ثُمَّ تَقْرُسُهُ لِلْمَاءِ ثُمَّ تَضَحُهُ ثُمَّ تُصَلِّي فِي. So thumma here indicates there is an order, meaning that if you prayed in it without doing that, your prayer would not be accepted. Your prayer would not be accepted. We'll cover another mas'ala at the end of the next hadith. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قالت خولة يا رسول الله فإن لم يذهب الدم قال يكفيك الماء ولا يضرك أثره أخرجه الترمذي وسنده ضعيف. From the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that he said, Khawla said. In some of the narrations it is mentioned that Khawla here is Khawla bint Yasar. And Khawla here is unknown. She is majhula. She is not known who she is in the hadith. If the hadith were to be authentic, then it would not matter because she would be in the position of a Sahabi or Sahabiya radiallahu anha. However, in this case, the hadith is da'if. And it's da'if because it is from the narrations of Abdullah ibn Lahiya, rahimahullah ta'ala. Abdullah ibn Lahiya was a reliable scholar of, or narrator of hadith, except that towards the end of his life, like they say, he changed towards the end of his life. And the reason he changed is because his books were burnt. His books burnt away. And when his books burnt away, he became muhtalat. He became confused with the different narrations because he didn't have his books to refer to and revise from, so he became confused. As for those who took from Abdullah ibn Lahiya before he became confused and he burnt his books or his books were burnt, then their narration is correct, but this narration is from the narrations of Abdullah ibn Lahiya that came after his books were burnt, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best, and therefore this narration is weak. And for that reason, we don't know, we can't really affirm that Khawla is from the companions radiallahu anha, Khawla bint Yasar radiallahu ta'ala anha, because we don't have an authentic narration to prove that this hadith is reliable, or whether this hadith is reliable or not. She said, O Messenger of Allah, what about if the blood does not go away? And that is something that all of you know when it comes to certain stains like blood and other things, that it's quite hard to get rid of the stain. You can imagine without soap, without, like varnish or whatever anyone uses to get rid of stains on clothing, without any stain remover, without any chemicals, they are removing these stains. It could well be that the stain doesn't go. So the Prophet ﷺ replied, water is enough for you, and the leftover effect will not harm you. The leftover effect or the trace of it will not harm you. As we said, this hadith is narrated by Imam al-Tirmidhi, and Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala said, Sanaduhu da'if. Sanaduhu da'if. He helped you out because Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar is one of the major scholars of ilm al-hadith, of the knowledge of hadith. So Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar helps you out here and says, this is a weak hadith. Okay, we know Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar. Up to now, we've covered 29 hadith in Bulugh and Maram. We know that Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar doesn't put a da'if hadith in there without a reason. Because Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar is telling you it's da'if, so why is he putting it in there? He's putting it in there because like we say, al-amalu ala hada. This is what we act upon. This ruling here is valid. The actual ruling here is valid. The hadith is weak, but the wording of the hadith and the ruling of the hadith is valid. So there is no doubt whatsoever that anyone who tries to remove something impure from their clothing, anybody who tries to remove something impure from their clothing and does every effort to do so and follows the sunnah in getting rid of it, and then there is some color left over, then that color does not harm the purity of the clothing whatsoever. And there is no doubt about this, and I don't know of any disagreement on this topic among the scholars of Islam. However, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, it's not a book of fiqh that he can mention to you ijma, or he can mention to you Qala Shafi'i or Qala Ahmed. It's a book of hadith. So he puts in there a da'if hadith where the wording is accepted and acted upon, but the hadith is da'if. So the hadith is not a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and we don't say the Prophet ﷺ said. However, we say that the ruling in fiqh, I don't want to say consensus without researching it, but at least I don't know of any disagreement on the topic, that if you make every effort to remove an impurity, and you clean it, and you wash it, and you do everything according to the sunnah, and there remains some color, that color does not affect the purity of the garment. And that's an important ruling, because as we know, there are many things we may wash on our clothes, on our children's clothes. The color may not come out, especially on things that stain like blood. The color may not come away from the clothing completely, and therefore, in this case, you do your best, as Allah Azza wa Jalla said, fear Allah as much as you can, and if there is something remaining, it does not harm the purity of the clothing. There are some other issues we wanted to talk about. We talked about menstrual blood, but the issue of blood in general is probably useful to mention at this point. Blood, Al-Imam An-Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, Ibn Abdul Barr, who else? An-Nawawi and Ibn Abdul Barr and Ibn Hazm, rahimahullah, all of them mentioned the ijma' of the scholars of Islam upon the fact that the blood of every human being and the blood of every animal that's meat is not eaten is najis. Or is najis. Everyone agrees with this, and I know Al-Shawkani rahimahullah ta'ala disagree, but in general this is a matter of consensus, because the consensus was recorded prior to Imam Al-Shawkani rahimahullah ta'ala from them who recorded the consensus, An-Nawawi, Ibn Hazm, Ibn Abdul Barr and others rahimahullah, who narrated that there is consensus that blood is impure. And therefore any blood that you get on your clothing, any blood that you get on your hands needs to be washed off before you pray. But this brings us to a different issue. What do we have to wash and when? And what about if we find it during the prayer? So let's take the first issue. If you find something impure on your clothing prior to you praying, and it is possible for you to remove that impurity before the time of the prayer finishes, then this is what you must do. So let's give an example. The Dhuhr Adhan goes and I find some blood on my clothing. It's obligatory for me to wash the blood off my clothing to the best of my ability, because I have plenty of time between Dhuhr and Asr that I can use to go and change my clothing or remove it or clean it or whatever I can do. Even if I'm outside far away from home, I can spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes to clean that piece of clothing because I don't have any rush. However, somebody finds blood on their clothing 5 minutes before the Asr Adhan and they haven't prayed for her. In this case, they must do their best to remove as much as they can, but they must pray on time, even if it means that they pray with some impurities still remaining on their clothing. So this is the example of a person. He is about to miss the entire time for the prayer. Maybe he hasn't prayed for her and there is only 2 minutes until Asr starts. Then he simply just has to pray as he is, or do his best to remove a little bit with a bit of water and then pray as he is. Because this person does not have the time to be able to remove this impurity properly from their clothing and still be able to pray on time. So praying on time goes ahead of that, and the person does not need to repeat the prayer. They do not repeat the prayer. They do the best that they can to remove as much as they can. Now we come to the issue, what about in the middle of the prayer? So this is the example of the person in the middle of praying. They realize that there is something impure on their clothing. We've already covered the hadith of the shoes. We just mentioned it in brief. The hadith when the Prophet ﷺ removed his shoes in the prayer, because Jibreel told him there was something unclean. That is, if the clothing is something that you are able to remove, like a ghutra, head covering, a turban, or shoes, or a bisht, like a cloak, or for example, a jacket, or anything that you are wearing that you can remove, you must remove it and discard it. Okay? So this is a person who, when they start praying Dhuhr, they look and they see that there is a patch of blood, maybe they were carrying their infant child, there is a patch of blood on their jacket. Simply during the prayer, take off the jacket and leave it and pray as normal. Or they notice on their shamah, on their ghutr, or their turban, there is something, just take it off. Or the hat, they notice there is something on the hat, so you just take it off. However, what about if it's something that they can't take off, they can't remove, so it's on their clothing, they could not remove and still pray. So in this case, it again depends on the circumstances. If there is again time remaining and the person is able to go and to break from their prayer and clean it, then that is what they should do. However, if they feel that the time for the prayer will pass, then they pray as they are, they do not have to repeat the prayer. But in general, the person has to, when they see it and they can't remove it, they should break their prayer. they should go, they should clean it, they should come back and pray. The only exception to that is if there is no time left to pray, in which case they must pray as they are, and there is no repeating of the prayer which is needed. Final circumstance, what about someone who prays Dhuhr and then sees that there is blood on their clothing that they didn't realize about prior to Dhuhr? In that case, the person must continue and they do not have to repeat the prayer. So there is no repeating of the prayer because we know that this ummah has been forgiven for nisyan, for forgetfulness. So if the person didn't realize that they had some blood on their clothing and then they prayed and afterwards they realized there is no need for them to repeat their prayer, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, their prayer is valid. The last issue that we should cover on this topic is regarding the imam. The same goes for the imam in general, but there are a couple of extra things we should mention when someone is leading someone else in salah. As soon as the imam realizes that he has something impure on his clothing, again he should break the prayer. If he can't throw it off, he should break the prayer and the people wait for him. Then he comes back again and starts the prayer anew. Starts a new prayer with them behind. Alternatively, he can ask someone else to do the same thing, i.e. someone else to start the prayer anew. Or the third option is that he can ask someone from the congregation to step forward, continue leading the prayer without breaking it, and even though there was something impure on his clothing, their prayer is still valid as long as it was an accident he didn't realize. Because as we said, the ummah has been forgiven for forgetfulness. So we'll go through that issue again. The imam is praying, he sees he has something impure on his clothing. If he can remove it, he removes it. If not, he has to break his prayer, presuming there is time to break his prayer. He breaks his prayer. When he breaks his prayer, he has three options when he breaks his prayer. One is to say to the people, wait. So they break their prayer and they wait for him to come back and they all begin their prayer new. The second is for him to say wait and for him to appoint someone else to lead the prayer and he begins from anew. And the imam maybe goes, if it's a lot of cleaning he needs to do, he goes and cleans. The third is that the imam requests someone in the first saf to take 2 steps forward and lead the prayer without anyone breaking the prayer. And the important thing from this, from An-Najasah, is that the prayer is valid because the imam did not realize that he had something impure on him. As for if the imam realizes and continues to pray, then Allahu A'lam, many of the scholars say the prayer of the congregation and the imam is broken. And everyone's prayer is broken if he realizes and continues without a reason. For example, if he realizes and he continues without there is still time for him to break the prayer, there is still time for him to go and clean it, then some of the scholars said that the prayer of the people who are praying is broken as well. And they have to repeat their prayer and he has to repeat his prayer. And of course this is simple. And the last issue, what about if a person is unable to remove certain najasat from their clothing? For example, what about if somebody has istihada, for example, and the lady, she's bleeding constantly without being able to stop the bleeding? Then in this case, she should do her best. She cleans herself before the prayer, she puts a fresh sanitary towel before the prayer, and then she prays her prayer, even if the blood is flowing on the prayer mat, as is narrated in the authentic hadith. She does only her best, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَسْتَطَعْتُمْ, fear Allah Azza wa Jalla as much as you are able to fear Him. So if, for example, a person says, as an example, they have a wound and the wound is bleeding, and they are doing their best, they have cleaned it, they have covered it with a new cloth, and it keeps bleeding in the prayer, they keep praying. Because at the end of the day, it's not possible, unless they can go and clean it up and they, it will stop, like the bandage slipped and they can. But otherwise, if it's going to create a difficulty, they just pray as they are. And they fear Allah as much as they can. And there is no harm in this, neither for the imam, nor for the people who are praying behind the imam. So we've covered a number of different types of najasat, how to clean them. We've covered a number in the previous chapter also with regard to Babul Ani. So we spoke about the dog and we spoke about a number of other issues, and we've given some principles and some rules, some fiqh principles and rules to do with things becoming easy, to do with the concept that we mentioned just now with regard to فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, fear Allah as much as you can. And other principles that we mentioned throughout, that all the animals that you can't eat, their blood is impure. As for the animals that you can eat, that was one we also forgot to mention, then their blood is in two types, pure and impure. The impure blood of the animal that you can eat is the blood that is spilled when the animal is slaughtered. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَوْ دَمًا مَسْفُوحًا, أَوْ دَمًا مَسْفُوحًا. So the dam masfuh, this is the blood that is spilled from the neck of the animal when the animal is slaughtered. This blood is impure and has to be cleaned. As for the blood that remains within the animal after slaughter, then this blood is halal. It is permissible to eat it along with the food.